Good morning, everybody, wherever you are. If it's joining me live, welcome to this beautiful time of gathering together on a Sunday. And then, however, you are perhaps catching this video, if it's from my YouTube channel, I wish you the best in this moment in time. It's always good to stop, to take a breath, to even ask ourselves, do we even know what intention is? Do we even know what it means to be intentional with energy? Do we know what it means to be in a space of invitation, to be open, to let go of preconceived ideas and attachments, to just practice being in the now, suspending agenda, and just saying, I welcome. I welcome the wisdom of the ancients to remember through me. I welcome the wisdom of the ancients to remember through me. I welcome the power of the ancients to flow through me. I welcome the love of the ancients to create through me. That is my prayer. That is my intention. That is my invitation as I am with you this morning. I let go of any preconceived ideas, known or unknown, that I might have, seen or unseen, that I might subscribe to, just to be used as the vessel. Just as the incredible prayer of St. Francis, Lord, make me an instrument of thy peace. Oh, great Spirit, oh, great benevolent energies of love and life, make me an instrument of your wisdom. May we all receive exactly what it is that we are ready to receive. May we open our hearts. May we listen with fresh ears. And may that intention now take us to new experiences of power, reawaken us to our divine magnificence. For this we are grateful. Take a deep breath with me wherever you are in this time. Take a deep breath with me and say, and so it is, Ashe, Amen. Good morning, everybody. Welcome, welcome. Thank you all for those who are joining in. Um, it's always fun for you to let me know where you're coming from and to say hi to everybody else within the live feed. And again, for those of you who may be watching, um, thank you for finding this most likely on my YouTube channel. And for those of you who didn't know there was a YouTube channel, you can go to David Ault and you can see a category there that says Live Talks. And wow, there's quite a few there from many, many years. So have at it and enjoy. So today, again, if you're watching this live, it is Father's Day. Again, one of those recurring things that we as teachers or ministers try to find new and fresh approaches with regards to messages there. I think what's so fascinating, what is so beautiful about that is not everybody shares the same sentiment about this particular day. There are those who revere their fathers and have incredible memories and can look back um, at the way in which there was a beautiful hand holding into maturity from that particular archetype of their physical father. And then there are those who did not have that, and somewhere in between. So we all kind of gravitate around these particular marked occasions with our own history and with our own agenda. I would say for me, there has been quite a bit of pain with my father transitioning when I was 7. So there was a lot of sentimentality that was cultivated over the years with regards to a story that I created around him. And remembering just a few, just literally a handful of memories of his actual physical presence and my contact with him. But always repeating this particular narrative as if it was carved in stone. And it wasn't until this past year that I began to see that that narrative wasn't accurate. And there was a lot of pain associated with that reawakening, that uncovering of that. Not really important to go into that today, but I feel I feel compelled to talk about this thing called pain and the way in which we are in relationship to it. So it seems a little bit odd to be bringing this up on this occasion of Father's Day, but stay with me. So as I thought about pain, I thought of our our human interaction with pain and how there is an immediacy at times to want to make it go away. And yet I find that pain is quite useful if we know how to work with it. Years ago, I can't tell you exactly how many, but I woke up with um, what I felt was a profound insight, this wisdom that somehow had downloaded itself in my consciousness. And that wisdom was that all pain is a mistrust in the divine. Let me repeat that. All pain is a mistrust in the divine. And I remember thinking in that moment of that download of like, whoa, almost a little bit of ego of look, oh, that's so clever, that's so amazing, that's so uh, profound. And there is truth to that. All pain is a mistrust in the divine, but I have come to realize that that's only half true. That not all pain is a mistrust in the divine. There is pain that is useful to the evolution of our journey. So, coupling that with this idea of Father's Day, I'm going to go to the famous narrative that we all know about the prodigal son. Know this about stories, about allegory and parables, that every character within those stories is a facet of us. It's as if it's a hologram, and each of the fragments or the characters are aspects of our behavior, our psyche. And so, in this famous biblical narrative of the prodigal, we are the father. So, the archetype of the father. And what does that archetype represent? In this particular story, it represents the unfailing forgiveness, the totality, the never ending acceptance and love that emanates from the origin of that which is divine love. That which is love, that which is the Father knows no judgment, holds no grudges, does not keep score, but there is a perpetual welcoming of arms whenever it is that we return back to it. Again, in total acceptance and in celebration, regardless of what we have done. So that is a bit of the way in which that father in the story is cloaked. And of course, who wouldn't want that, right? Then there are other aspects to the story. There is the jealous brother. We've been that, where we see that kind of acceptance and love exhibited towards someone, and we might be jealous of that and be oblivious to the fact that it's also available to us. And then there is the prodigal himself, ourself, herself, which gets dissatisfied with the current state of affairs and wants to go off and to do its own thing. And so those are some of the introductions into what I want to call useful pain today. So what was it within the prodigal, and what is it that has been in us at stages of our lives that have outgrown a situation? Do you know what I mean by outgrown a situation? Have you ever been in an environment, a workplace, a career path where you realize that it's not going anywhere? that you have reached the totality of what it is that you are supposed to do within that particular environment. And so when we are there, something called discontent begins to expand. That discontent is actually a beautiful form of pain. It is a disruption in comfortability. It is a thing that prompts us to say, there is territory out here that you haven't even explored yet. So I want you to question security. I want you to question complacency. I want you to question this idea that it is somehow successful to stay in a career path for decades and decades and decades and then retire with a watch, which was an old idea, an old paradigm. There is a discontent within us when we have been in, let's say, a philosophy, a teaching, a religion, a dogma that has had very rigid, exclusive teachings and pathways and restrictions. I know that was true for myself. I know growing up in this fundamentalist, traditional Christian background, that it wasn't until I was a teenager that I actually began to listen to the message. And the curious thing is that even though I did not know other messages existed, I knew that there was something about that message which was not resonating with me. You follow? And so there was a discontent there. What's interesting about that kind of pain, that disruption, that discontent, is when we don't know any other thing, then we are being prompted to move into an unknown. We are being prompted to grow without knowing what the next step is. And that's where the tendency to want to stay where we are lands within us. That's the thing that sometimes has us stay in the familiarity rather than honoring the pain of that discontent. Because to grow, we must outgrow. In order to experience that growth, we must embark upon some mystery. We must trade the history for mystery. We must be willing to step into or begin to climb a staircase where we cannot see the end. And that, for many of us, is painful. But that pain is useful when we follow it, when we allow it to take us, when we honor that discontent. So in the story of the prodigal son, that's exactly what he did. It wasn't that he did anything wrong. It wasn't that he was foolish. It wasn't that he was impulsive. There was a discontent there that said there must be more than just the farm, the community, the area, the region by which my father has been ruling and governing, even though he's been doing it kindly. There is something that propels us to want to seek our own path and to make our own mistakes and to do it our own way. And there's pain in that, but that pain is useful. Imagine if we didn't do that. And let me just ask you directly, has there been times when the discontent has roared inside of you, beckoning you to embark upon something that by other standards or by other people doesn't seem to make a lot of sense? That there is a collective judgment, that there are all kinds of name calling perhaps, or stones being hurled at your daring, as I like to say. Stones being hurled at your daring, which wants to keep us because we don't want to be in that disruption. But it becomes even more painful when we don't honor the discontent. So there's two aspects to that kind of pain. Pain is useful when it brings us to a greater awareness of the divine. Do you see what I mean? How can pain do that? By honoring the discontent, by stepping into the mystery. It is only then that we remove all of the barriers to what we think the divine was. It is only in surrendering, and like in the opening prayer and the opening invitation, saying, I welcome the wisdom of the ancients to remember through me. And in that remembering, it says, hey, there is so much more than you and I know and realize. But we won't get a taste of that unless we honor the discontent, unless we honor the inner propulsion. Just like the discontent of that which is in the embryo that knows that it must grow, just like the discontent in the intelligence inside the bud that knows that it must burst forth what is familiar. Again, all of those nature examples are very familiar, but how do you and I apply it in this human skin suit? Because in order to do that, we must find within ourselves the inner conviction and the trust of self, of that which is in the pain, to say yes to it. And so what he does is he leaves, and boy, does he make a lot of mistakes. Again, can you identify with that? Can you identify with saying yes to the discontent and then barking off, and then lo and behold, what happens? We become disappointed. We become disappointed because the expectation now that we have carried with us into this mystery is not being met. It's very much like the hero's journey, Joseph Campbell's symbology, and how there is this sort of wasteland, if you will, this nomadic place where we are wandering, and we feel as though we not only have made a mistake, but there's no one around to help pick us up, and there's no way that we can turn back. It's sort of limbo land. It's in this perpetual mystery where we feel alone. And there's great disappointment there because we wanted people to act a certain way. We wanted people to do things. People who said that they would do things did not do what they said they were going to do. And so there is a pain in the attachment of the expectation. Again, the prodigal finds that, experiences that. You know, the story tells us that he carried with him the wealth, the bag of money that his father gave him, and well-wishing him for his trip. Being unskilled with how to maybe manage that or use it wisely, he used it in a way that was for the flashy. He used it in a way that was to buy favoritism for people. He was seduced with the insincerity of others. But as long as he had that resource, he was supposedly attractive. He was supposedly sought after. Again, I want to pause and say, do you find yourself in that version of pain? I know that I have. I know that there have been many times where I have been seduced by those perhaps loving and liking an image rather than those loving or liking me. And when the image somehow has humanity to it, has frailty to it, has its own questioning, it has its own blunders, then that is no longer attractive, or that is no longer desirable, and all of a sudden I'm nothing more than a commodity or a resource, and I know that you have experienced that as well. And that's painful. It's very, very painful to realize that people might have been in love with an expectation of you, an image of you, rather than a sincere understanding of wanting to love the heart of you, the soul of you, of wanting to get to know that in an unconditional format. So it's painful. It's painful to be discarded. It is painful to have these expectations and attachments. And how do we dissolve that? Because it's one thing to say that we must be in a pathway or an energy system of high involvement and low attachment. But we can say it, but it isn't until you and I actually put ourselves in that environment that we stumble and fumble, that we surrender to the pain rather than trying to prevent the pain, that we really understand the potency of attachment and also the liberation of letting the attachment go. And that's part of the lesson. And that's where pain is useful because, yes, it does. It brings us back more to the divine. Useful pain that is necessary in order to take the veils of our forgetfulness off of us. So the first one, again, is the discontent. The pain and the discontent that says to us, you must not settle for just being here. The pain of disappointment that comes with the attachments that we have, that realizes that that expectation provides limitation. And so those things are useful, those agonies, those dark nights of the soul, all of that bring us closer to the awareness of the divine. So as I said earlier, all pain is a mistrust in the divine. I want to take that back. Some pain is, but other pain is useful in returning us to the divine, you see. And then the final step of the pain within the story of the prodigal is the complete, utter pain of failure. The failure that this young man felt living in a pigsty, reduced to such slovenly nature, reduced to something that comparatively might fall in the category of like a caste system that they have in the Hindu tradition. And there is a lower caste, but then under the lower caste, there is even that which is the untouchable. It was as if he was reduced to this caste system of the untouchable, that he had to eat with the sow, the pigs in the pig pen, that no one wanted to be near him because all of his resources, all of the things that the amoebas were feeding off of, the parasites were feeding off of, no longer had fuel for them to be nourished. And so all of that was gone. And yes, even that kind of pain is useful. The pain of failure. So I want you to stop and I want you to think about failure. At the beginning of 2020, I had created an online course, and it was 4 different rituals in order to welcome in this new decade, not just a new year, but a new decade. And what could we do to be intentional with this new decade, 2020? What could we do? And what came to me was this topic of failure. And that when we don't revisit the failure, I know that sounds really weird, but when we don't revisit the failure through a different lens, a lens of compassion, when we don't revisit that pain from an educational willingness, then chances are we just continue that pain or that series of failure in different geographical places with different names and different circumstances, but the same energy. And I thought, what would it be like to, as I enter into 2020, to go back to 2010 up into 2020 and make a list of all my failures? What? Make a list of all my failures. And so I did. I took out calendars, I took out notebooks, I took out all of the things that had any kind of timeline documentation about the last 10 years, which happened to coincide with my move to Atlanta. And so that made it a little bit easier because it was all in one geographical location. And let me tell you, there was an avalanche of failure from the perception of humanity. An avalanche of failure. And I began to document all of those things. And I wanted to create ritual around that failure. In other words, instead of trying to just override it or move on, how many of you have tried to move on from failure, from the pain of that failure? Instead of just moving on, it was no, let me turn to it. Let me say, hey, what nugget of wisdom is in here? What was it that you were trying to teach me? Because you see, all not all pain is a mistrust in the divine. Some pain is educational and valuable if it brings us back to a greater awareness of the divine. So instead of moving away or distancing ourselves from the pain, to turn to that failure, the failure within like that 10-year timeline, and to look and see, what did I learn from that? What value, what thing prompted me to make another decision? What thing catapulted me into such reaching out for support? What thing expanded me from that particular experience? And it was powerful. It was so powerful to look. It was incredibly fascinating to see that there were recurring themes. And so, like the prodigal in the pig pen, what happens? What happens with that level of failure? You see, because there are some failures that happen that we just move on. We don't glean the lesson. But when it's a failure that reduces us and pushes us into a corner where we let go all melodrama, and we go, you know what? I don't want to miss this opportunity. Then that pain, the pain of failure, boy, does that return us back to the awareness, the presence of the divine. And so that's what happens in the story. In the philosophy that I was raised in, The Science of Mind, in the textbook written by Ernest Holmes, in the very back of that, in a large section, there is a lot of biblical narrative that he applies metaphysical understanding to. And this story of the prodigal son plays a big part in that particular textbook. He called the place that the son goes to, the prodigal goes to, the far country. And what I love about that term is that you and I go into the far country every day. We go into the far country via thought in our consciousness. When we move away from the understanding that we are one with the divine, off we go. Off we go into the far country. What typically brings us back? Pain. What typically brings us back? Disappointment. What typically brings us back? Discontent. This is what I mean by useful pain. We come back to the Father. We come back to the welcoming arm. We come back to the acceptance, the love that has only known and seen us as love and continues to only know and see us as love. Because not only have we been made in that, but we are continuing to surrender and ask to be made in that image even more at the level of our awareness. You see, the prayer of St. Francis, Lord, make me an instrument of your peace. Well, you know, that's an ongoing process. Lord, make me an instrument of your power. Lord, make me an instrument of your divine nature, of your wisdom. All of those things are ongoing. There's no finish line in that, because that wisdom, that love, that power has no boundary. And so this Father's Day, I want you to consider that story. I want you to consider the archetype of the Father. I want you to consider that that archetype, that presence, is in you. It isn't distant. It isn't separate. It is a part. We are a part of the hologram of all of that. And that when we do something as seemingly weird as celebrate pain, of honoring the usefulness of that pain, if it is that pain that indeed brings us back to the Father. Just like in the story, the son returns. He returns physically. He returns home. You and I return to that in mind. You and I return to that through the power of forgiveness. You and I return back to that from surrender. So I invite you to surrender this Father's Day to the archetype of that, which is constantly open and welcoming and says, I see you, I love you, I honor you. This is all that I know you to be. And one way to get there, one way to get there, to sincerely get there, is to begin to look at your pain as useful. And so what makes pain not useful is when we just keep running away from it. That kind of pain is in a mistrust in the divine. That kind of pain says, I don't trust. I don't trust the world. I don't even trust this spirituality that I say I believe in. I don't really do it. I'm doing it on the surface, but deeply rooted, I don't really trust any of this. So I'm going to keep running. I'm going to keep workshopping. I'm going to keep doing, because ultimately, I just don't want to feel pain. So I'm giving you a little twist here. Don't be afraid of the pain. You, we all have the power to make that pain useful. That's my wish for you this week. Experiment with that. Do what it was that I was talking about in that online course that I posted at the beginning of the year. Go back and play with the idea of sitting down and journaling about all of your past failures. And instead of reigniting or feeding any shame that might be there, do something absurd with them and go, thank you. Thank you. Thank you for bringing me home to the Father. And trust me, by doing that, we do return, we do come home, we do get a greater understanding of the divine. Thank you again for joining me. Know that I never take your presence for granted. What a thrill it is to know that through this avenue of technology, that there are those of you who want to come and spend this time with me. So I love you, I honor you, I honor your pain, I hear you, and I pray, I intend that you begin to find usefulness in your pain. Much love. Till next time. Take care.